Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ward 7 Education Council meeting. We have a very exciting meeting for you today. And because it is packed, we're going to get started. I want to say thank you again for coming to our meeting. This month is indeed Women's History Month. So we always celebrate the months. And then I want to get into the agenda. Hold on one second. I'm trying to make sure that I'm letting people in too. Okay. So the agenda for today is we will begin with Abigail Higgins, who is a contributor to Greater Washington. She has penned a phenomenal series on school boundaries, what that means, why, what the impact and the outcomes of that, what's the historical implications. Then we will have Mary Filardo, Executive Director of 21st Century School Fund, who will come to us and talk to us about master facilities plan and planning process. Both the school boundaries and the master facilities process is kicking off this month in earnest. And so they will have huge implications for education over the next decade. So it is important that we are highly engaged and informed. Then we will have our normal updates from our school board reps, state board, I always say school, I meant State Board of Education rep, Eboni-Rose Thompson. She is our Ward 7 representative. We'll end with some announcements from the Ward 7 Education Committee, and we will adjourn on time as we always do. With that being said, I do want to announce that the School Boundary and Student Assignment Committee has been named, and these are the persons on the committee. Just want to give you a opportunity to look and see names so that you will know who will be engaged in this process. I will say that Ward 7 is well represented. So we are excited about that. And that is because, quite frankly, east of the river schools and education has the most to lose or gain from this process. So I'm glad that there's some representation to support the amount of students we have in this system and the impact it could potentially have on our community. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I really want to hand this over to Abigail Higgins, who is with Greater Washington. But if you haven't seen or read the articles, I just want to take you through some of the headlines so that you can know what she has been writing about and the issues that are at stake. So the first part of a 4-part series was how schools in DC were part of a legacy of segregation. The second part was how school boundaries and feeder patterns shape DC housing and education inequalities. The third one was the ripple effects of how and if kids are able to commute safely to school. And the fourth is what experts say needs to be done to disrupt historic patterns of segregation in DC schools. Hold on, I just want to make sure. Okay. And then there was a follow-up article recently, the DC Boundary Review could advance equity, advocates say. So as you can see, this is a very robust conversation that we're about to engage in. And I want to bring Abigail to the fore and to talk to us about what she discovered, what was the catalyst for this series of articles, and what we need as we engage in this process in our community. So Abigail, I'm going to ping you. I've stopped sharing, and I'm going to make you the focal point. And when you're ready, we're ready. You're not on, we only see your name. We don't see you yet. So
yeah, it looks like, hi, it looks like I'm unable to start video because the host has stopped it, it says. So I think maybe you could either make me a co-host or
yeah, I just made your co-host.
okay.
Is that the case for everyone? Well, I see some people on video, so weird. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Okay, but the floor is yours. You want to tell us a little bit about you and the work you do and what drew you to this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, thank you all so much for having me. And thank you for inviting me, Marla. I feel really honored to be talking to this group. And honestly, a little intimidated because I think everyone here is more of an expert on education in DC than I am. So hopefully I won't talk the whole time because I would love to get everyone's thoughts on these important topics. So yeah, I'm a freelance journalist. I live here in DC. And I will say that I'm actually relatively new to the education beat. I cover inequality, housing, gender, and labor for publications like the Washington Post, for The Nation, for Al Jazeera, and of course, local publications like Greater Washington, who I did this series in partnership with. I also edit part-time at DCist and WAMU. And before I moved to DC, I've lived here for about 4 years. I was a foreign correspondent in East Africa, so reporting in Kenya and around the continent. So yeah, I think, Greater Washington reached out to me about doing this series, and I was really excited to say yes to it for a few reasons. This series was, the reason that we were doing it now is because obviously this school boundaries review process was coming up and was going to be only the second time that this process had happened since 1968. So it was really obvious to me that this was an important time to be writing about this topic. It also felt really important as someone who, DC is home now, and I, plan to be here permanently. But as a relative newcomer to the city, it felt like a really important opportunity to dig into a topic that was really important for the city and think about it more and hopefully create something that was a little bit useful for other folks who call this home. So I'll just kind of run through, if it works for everyone, some of the kind of main findings for these articles, some of the things that I found interesting and surprising, and hopefully some of that will be useful. I saw a request to drop the articles in the chat, so I'm sure we can do that.
Yeah, I'll take care of that while you just
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So yeah, as Marla ran through, we started this series with sort of a historical look at school boundaries. You really can't understand education or housing in DC or anywhere if you don't look at history and like how we got to where we are today. One of the reports that was that I used a lot throughout this series is a report by the Urban Institute. I'll actually drop a link in the chat to the tool that they developed, because it's kind of it's a really interesting thing to spend some time with. But basically in 2019, the Urban Institute came up with a report that found that basically school boundaries in DC and also across the United States hewed very closely to redlining maps, which were the racist New Deal era federal policy that determined who got home loans and who didn't, based pretty much entirely on race. And, you know, those lines are still what our school boundaries look like today, which is concerning for a lot of reasons, among them that these lines create school boundaries not only based on race and ethnicity, but create very clear lines between how well staffed schools are, what test scores look like, and, you know, a variety, what kinds of resources schools have, and a variety of other indicators of whether or not like students have a successful education experience. So I think a really important thing to think about when you look at the history of this process and when you look at the history of segregation, housing, and education in DC is that this was a really deliberate and intentional process that occurred when the government like very explicitly colluded with banks to disenfranchise Black Americans from home ownership and to segregate US cities. I think sometimes this is spoken about as if it were an accidental process or sort of like a thing that happened through people making individual choices or individuals making choices. And that was, of course, part of it. But like this was a very systematic process. And it's a systematic process that we now have to live, that we're like continuing to live with today. And that is very clear when you look at these school boundary and maps and redlining maps and how they overlap with each other. You know, another thing that I found to be really important and interesting in terms of the history of education in DC in particular is the really radical history of Black parents organizing to demand better conditions for their children and to demand changes from the US government, including that in 1947, Black parents in Washington, DC went on strike, pulling their children out of school to demand better conditions. You know, demand better, you know, there were the student teacher ratios were like out of control. Classrooms were extremely overloaded, you know, and school buildings were falling apart. There were just like a variety of really unacceptable conditions. And instead of accepting that, parents organized and demanded better. And as a part of that organizing, sort of a culmination of it is that Black DC parents played a huge role in what would become Brown v. Board of Education. You know, obviously the case that desegregated the American school system. And
can I just say one thing about that? Because people don't realize, I think that Brown v. Board is a culmination of a lot of different cases that ended up being brought together. And so they always think about it as just one single case. There was a lot of movements in different parts of the country that actually got brought together in this seminal decision of Brown v. Okay, that's all.
Absolutely. No, thank you for adding that, and please feel free to hop in and add context whenever. Yeah, the case was I believe Spotsford v. Bowling, which was one of the 5 cases that made up Brown v. Board of Education. And that case was particularly important because Brown v. Board of Education was interpreted as only being for states, and DC obviously was not and is not a state. And again, something that feels really important to remember about history, given what we still see happening today, is that this desire and demand of DC parents to desegregate schools and demand better conditions for their children was stymied by the US government not recognizing DC as a state and therefore trying to interfere in the desires of local parents. Which is unfortunately something that you know we're seeing happen right now. So yeah, I think, you know, despite this case Bowling, you know, there were a variety of different things that allowed schools to, while they were formally, you know, legally desegregated, they actually became more segregated in a lot of cases. Within 2 years of Bowling, DC's white public school population had dropped by almost 1/3. with several schools going from all white to all Black in just a handful of years. By 1965, white students comprised less than 10% of public school students, but commanded 34% more spending per pupil than Black students. You know, and this is reflective of something that is true across the country, which is that Black and white students are more segregated today than they were during the civil rights movement. And there's a quote that I think is really important here, that I included in the article, which is from a researcher named Richard Rothstein. And he says about this process, without our government's purposeful imposition of racial segregation, the other causes, private prejudice, white flight, real estate steering, bank redlining, income differences, and self-segregation still would have existed, but with far less opportunity for expression. So all of those things were a part of DC schools segregating, but it was also, you know, a deliberate decision by the government. Okay, so I will I'll jump a little bit ahead to sort of talk about today, and what the, you know, what some of those effects are that we're living with as a result of that history. You know, the DC is, as we all know, is a very segregated city. At $141,650 is the median income for white households, which is more than 3 times that of Black households. And home ownership is lowest amongst the city's Black residents. And there is a very dramatic difference between the median home value for white and Black homeowners in the city. And we see that impact education because obviously, like, school boundaries are in part drawn along neighborhood lines. And so when our neighborhoods are super unequal, our schools are often going to be super unequal as well. DC has a really interesting school choice and lottery model that, again, I'm sure everyone on this call knows a lot about. But almost half of students go to public charter schools and half go to traditional public schools. And students can either go to their neighborhood school that they're districted into, or they can participate in the lottery and apply to go to a school somewhere else. You know, it's a lottery system, so it's not guaranteed. But just 28% of public school students attend the institution that their address guarantees them access to, and 72% use the common lottery to go to another school. There are a lot of ways in which this process opens up some opportunities for more equality. There are also ways in which this process just reifies inequality. You know, one feeder pattern really stands out when it comes to boundary participation, and that's the Jackson-Reed feeder pattern, which is sort of like in the upper northwest corner of the city. We're sort of like Tenleytown and those neighborhoods are located. It's, you know, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods. It's one of the wealthiest wards in the city. And it has an in-boundary participation of 79%, which is almost 3 times higher than the district's average. So many more students choose to go to their neighborhood school there than they do in the rest of the city. It also has the highest level of private school enrollment. So almost half of the students in Ward 3, which roughly overlaps with the Jackson-Reed feeder pattern, attend private school. And the citywide average is only about 16%. So I think that, like, gives us some information about why the lottery system is imperfect. It's also helpful to think about the fact that so one way that this has sort of been, the inequality of the lottery system has been measured is looking at DC's at-risk students. So at-risk students make up 45% of DC's public school system. And that's either because they're homeless, they're in foster care, their families receive cash or food assistance from the government, or they're overage in high school. So those families are less likely to use the lottery system. There's a lot of reasons for that, but among them, like, the lottery system can be difficult to research, it can be difficult to access. It takes time. There's also some other reasons that I'll get into in a second. But at-risk kids are also less likely to get into their lottery choices, even if they do participate. Part of that is because of sibling preference. If one family's child goes to a school, the sibling will get preference to get into that school, which makes sense in a lot of ways. Parents want their kids to go to the same school, but that means that the sort of existing divisions are often sustained, and it gives limited opportunities for other students to get into those highly desired schools. There are also just really long wait lists for these sort of like highly desired schools, or highly sought after schools, I guess, which makes it a lot harder for new kids to get into them. I think another really important point when we think about the lottery system is that getting to school doesn't look the same for all kids in the city, right? And that's true for a variety of reasons. Councilmember Christina Henderson put it this way to me. She said, we like to talk about choice, but the reality is if you can't get to those choices, it's not really a choice, right? And there's a lot of reasons why that choice looks different. One is just like literally like, not everyone has the time to drive their kid to the other side of the city. It is also, not every kid feels similar levels of safety commuting to school. Kids in Ward 7 and Ward 8 tend to have, on average, have longer commutes to school than other kids in the city. And not all kids, for very good reasons, feel safe on those commutes to school. Obviously, gun violence is a huge problem in DC, and kids in 2021, almost 80% of DC residents lived within half a mile of a homicide, but Black residents were 19 percentage points more likely to live within that radius. And like really tragically, that disparity widens for children. 89% of children of color and 57% of white children live within a half mile of a homicide. So I don't know that that's like necessarily crime is extremely complicated, and I don't know that that's like the one indicator that we should point to, but it does just offer an example for how like kids feel different levels of safety trying to get to school. There's also things just like a little bit more anodyne, like sidewalks, and like whether you feel like safe letting your kids walk to school, and whether they're going to be like walking along the side of the road part of the way. So yeah, what do we do about this, right? We're like looking at the boundary process. We see all of these really overwhelming problems and disparities. How do we solve them? And I wish I had a really pat obvious answer to that. Experts who I talked to gave me a few ideas. One of them is that adjusting school boundaries can potentially have an impact on some of DC's inequities. Adjusting school boundaries to ensure that some schools are less overcrowded, to ensure that resources are a little bit better distributed. But school boundaries like are limited. They're not a silver bullet. They can't be like the only part of the solution. Until given the ways that resources are unevenly distributed across the city, and given the way that housing is unequally distributed across the city for these historical reasons that we discussed, or in part for these historical reasons, school boundaries are like only going to be able to do so much in themselves. Chelsea Coffin, who's a researcher at the DC Policy Center, said, when you move boundaries, you are changing the distribution of students, but you're not expanding the pie or making it sweeter, which I thought was like a good way to a nice way to put that. One possibility for improving the lottery system is something called at-risk preference. So in the same way that the lottery system currently has sibling preference, we could also institute an at-risk preference for some students. So, for students who are experiencing homelessness, or who receive SNAP benefits, those students could get an advantage in the lottery. which, currently they're disadvantaged in the lottery. So this is like, shouldn't necessarily be looked at as an advantage. It should be looked at as like, how do you make the lottery actually equal? One analysis by the DC Policy Center found that if you instituted this preference, even less of a preference than currently exists for the sibling lottery, but a preference, you could increase at-risk students' match rates to their desired schools from 4% to 42%. That would make a pretty big difference in terms of kids and families feeling like they can get to the school that they want to get to. This program's already being piloted. 11 charter schools started giving lottery preferences in 2022. That's a relatively small number of schools given the schools in the city overall, but it is already happening. So that program could be expanded. Another potential solution is investing in under-resourced schools, and neighborhood schools. One of the things that for the most recent article I published that people reiterated a lot is that families want to feel like there are high quality schools nearby. They don't want to feel like they have to ship their kids to the other side of the city to get a good education. And so how do we make sure that there are high quality schools with high quality programming all over the city? And how do we make sure that parents and community members have a voice in what that means, right? Because everyone has different concepts of what a good education looks like. For some students, for some families, Montessori programs are really important. For some parents, language immersion and a bilingual school is really important. For some parents, extracurriculars are really important. Mental health services, there's a variety of things that can make schools more desirable for students and families. So I think especially when we're looking at this upcoming school boundary process, what a lot of people said is that this is an opportunity not just to review what the school boundaries look like and ensuring that those boundaries are as equal as possible, but it is also an opportunity for parents, students, and community members to really have a voice in the process and say, what makes a good school for me? What makes a good school for my kids? And how do we make sure that schools look more like that and are more reflective of the communities that they're serving? Yeah, so I think that's, sorry, gosh, I feel like I've been talking for so long. But I think that's, I think those are most of my thoughts. I'm happy to answer questions, but I also just would be curious to hear if anyone has thoughts or perspective on these issues as folks who have been thinking about education in the city for a long time.
Okay, well, thank you, Abigail, for that summary. I do want everyone to know that it was put in the chat, the links. It's worth you taking the time to read. I think if there are questions at this time or comments, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. Looking. Okay, I know that Mike, you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity and the forum. So this question is more about some ideas that could be suggested to Ward 7 families on how to advocate and urge the city to reconsider opening up a language immersion middle school and leaning towards a high school, because we recently heard the news that EW Stokes on the East End isn't allowed to proceed with a middle school because there's some agreement with another charter school that we can't add a language immersion school. So that's a disturb. If we're talking about equity, this is a huge disservice to parents and families who are excited and have their kids in a language immersion school to know that after third grade, they are SOL, because there's only a limited number of seats at the feeder schools, and that's not right. So here we are talking about equity for the under-resourced communities, and you have a school that wants to continue a language immersion program and they're not allowed to. So I just wanted to get some thoughts, ideas on how we can, bring this to the forefront and help advocate for equitable language immersion programs for east of the river.
Can I just say one thing about that, Abigail, and then you can add your comments too. I think this is a persistent issue in Ward 7, period. School feeders are so important, and a lot of parents spend a lot of time figuring out the school feeder system, and that's where they try and get their kids in. We have inconsistent feeders, and so like I saw Laura put in the chat that HD Woodson doesn't have a dedicated feeder. Well, it has a half a dedicated feeder, like a half a middle school. And that's not enough to sustain a high school. We see these kind of inconsistent programming in terms of language immersion, in terms of STEM, in terms of other things. And so this is part of what we are advocating for and talking about consistently at the Ward 7 Ed Council, that if you start off in a particular type of programming, that we want to see a clear feeder pattern. We want to make sure all feeder patterns are strong, and so that we don't make ultimately leave parents with no choice but to leave their community to go to a school. That's part of the inequities we're talking about. I mean, I think this is a very complicated issue, but it's central to the conversations we have at Ward 7 Education Council. Abigail, anything you want to add along that way around that conversation?
No, not really. I mean, I think you covered it better, and I unfortunately don't have the best sense of like intervening how the most strategic ways to intervene in these systems. And I think that this group is has a lot more knowledge about that than I do. But yeah, it is very clear that both a lack of clarity around feeder patterns has been a persistent problem. And equity of programming has also been a consistent problem. I guess the only thing I would add is that I don't believe and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't believe there has yet been an official announcement of who is going to be leading the community engagement process during the school boundary review, but I believe that will be announced soon. And it does seem like during this school boundary review process that will be happening over the course of this year, it will be a really critical time and a really important opportunity for parents to voice these kinds of opinions of like, what does equity actually look like? And, things like having a consistent language immersion program that doesn't stop halfway through is something that parents and children everywhere in the city deserve. So yeah, it does seem like a really opportune time to be fighting for these things.
And I would just put in a plug for Ward 7 Ed Council that, our goal is to have every school, every LSAT, every PTO regularly attending our meetings so that we can coordinate these conversations and organize. That is part of the mission of Ward 7 Ed Council. So the only way that we can actually do that is that we have, at least one person from every one of our school involved in this conversation on a weekly basis, deeply involved. And when we do call for action at the end of every meeting, that people sign up for committees, because just to be frank, in other parts of the world, or other parts of the city, does happen, and there's strength in numbers. And so we need to replicate that process so that we can counteract some of these inequities that we experience in Ward 7. Are there another question? Anyone else want to ask a question?
Hi, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I put it in the chat, but I was just wondering if Abigail saw any connection between the issues with the feeder patterns and mayoral control of the education system here.
So to be honest, that didn't, let's see, that didn't come up in significant ways in my reporting, but that doesn't mean that that's not the case. I think that just, but experts who I spoke to didn't raise that, but that doesn't mean that, it's not potentially an issue. I'd be curious if anyone else in the call has thoughts about that.
I know that there are strong opinions around mayoral control for different people on this call. Whether they see it as a connection to this particular issue is a different is a different question. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to weigh in on this conversation.
Well, I saw, I saw Tiffany put in, she believes the current feeder pattern was in place before mayoral control. We've actually redone the boundaries since mayoral control was instituted. So we redid them 10 years ago. And that was actually when Gray was the mayor. But the recommendations technically went to Bowser because she had just been elected. And so we have changed the boundaries since then. I do think that having the mayor be the person to accept the boundaries does matter. Because I will say that with the recommendations that, and I was on the committee, so at that point in time, the recommendations that we laid out as that boundary committee, and I will say we probably had different lifting to do because we hadn't redone the boundaries in 40 years, looked different than what the mayor accepted. One of the decisions she made, and Sharona was on the committee as well, one of the decisions she made was to continue to have students in Ward 4, specifically in the Crestwood community, be able to continue to go to Wilson and Deal because she wanted that to continue to be their feeder pattern. As part of that, she also made the decision for Kelly Miller to then feed into both Eastern and Woodson. The other part of that decision was that Ron Brown would not reopen as a middle school because having Ron Brown be a middle school and having Kelly Miller be a middle school, both feeding into Woodson would have given Woodson 2 feeders, just like many of the at minimum, which is like the minimum for any other high school. The other thing that changed, and this is the last time I said about the former boundaries, because we have new boundaries now, but the other thing that changed in the last boundary process was Sousa, which Sousa actually used to feed into Eastern. Sousa is my neighborhood school. Eastern was my neighborhood school. We had dual rights, and students who live off of East Capitol Street, it's much easier for them to get to Eastern in a lot of cases than it is for them to get to Anacostia. But that decision was made because of a lot of the political narrative around not cutting off access for students from students to go west of the park and then also to go west of the river. So I do think that who accepts the boundaries, if it's a mayor or if you have, a school board that has equal representation from every ward, does matter.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think just reading comments in the chat where it's Mayor Filardo says, and she's coming up next, that the Mayor Bowser did not implement a major recommendation of the committee, which was to open round bound as a middle school in Ward 7. So yeah, the question is, so then I'm seeing other comments around the Highlands that used to feed into Kramer. So yes, so the who the mayor is and mayoral control probably does, as one would imagine, make it more political. It's not equal representation. People are not at the table thinking thoughtfully about those types of things as much. And so that does have implications. So I appreciate all these examples of the potential impact of mayoral control. I did see another question in the chat where someone raised San Francisco as an example. John, do you want to come off and give your question?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Just curious if anybody has information about how it's worked out in places like San Francisco, but there's probably others where they've basically eliminated their neighborhood preference. So everybody lotteries across like an entire city. So you don't have essentially a by right school, but there's just basically an open lottery for all schools within a city or a district.
Abigail, did anyone bring that to your attention, that model, and talk about it?
Not San Francisco in particular. I did just drop a report into the chat that the Century Foundation did, which looks at New York City, Chicago, Hartford, Dallas, and a handful of other cities that were like experimenting with different models in terms of, or like New York City does it this way, where like there just aren't neighborhood schools. You just, and I, since the series wasn't looking at how other cities did it, so I didn't explore in a lot of depth, like how DC compared to other places. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely a question that, as far as I can tell, there is a real lack of consensus amongst education experts and advocates in terms of, which of these models makes the most sense. A lot of people are really, for a lot of people, neighborhood schools are important because it's important to have a school that's close by. But also for a lot of people, neighborhood schools are also ways to reify segregation. So I don't have a pat answer for that. I'd be curious if anyone else does, but I do recommend taking a look at that report and some of the examples it raises.
Okay. Well, this has gone way faster than I ever had imagined. We're coming up at time. Is there a burning question? Laura? I think
I was going to say, I'll be real quick, just that like in those conversations at first, Kaya Henderson and like kind of the mayor's team floated the idea of like all the high schools being choice. And that was rejected by the public, and I think by a lot of the teachers as well in those schools, largely because our concern with choice is that you often then start judging schools based on very limited criteria, primarily test scores in this current environment, and that would just further decline the neighborhood investments and kind of turn to like an almost all charter, all lottery model of haves and have-nots instead of just investing in the school. So while I think lots of people are certainly concerned about segregation and the problems that poses, when the model was floated to open up all the high schools, it was very strongly rejected by at least by the people attending those sessions, which were, pretty largely attended by a lot of people.
So the other thing, Laura, that this is Mary here, is that choice sets were also rejected. The idea that you would have, 3 elementary schools and you would have to compete to go to one of the 3, that you would not have kind of an absolute right to any one of them. That was another thing that was looked at by the committee. And I know, for example, they're doing that in Durham now. They're trying to be very careful about, making sure that they have a specialized program in each of the choice sets, and they've got equitable programming. But that'll be a challenge. But anyway, that was another thing that was rejected.
Yeah, I think something similar to that was trying to be even implemented in Prince George's County. I don't think it got fully implemented, these kind of choice sets, for a lot of different reasons. That like you would have a right to go to schools with, you would put a set of programming in each set of schools, like so that there will always be all these different types of programs in these set of schools, and then you could choose which one of those in the set you could go to. I don't really think that held up in Prince George's County where it got ultimately implemented. So I think people have tried this. I think that, it's a complicated issue because on the one hand, Abigail talked about that the school boundaries were drawn largely to map onto redlining. On the other hand, it's like urban renewal where they where they put highways right through communities and divided them. And so the sense of community is gone when kids are going everywhere and you're not together. So these are very complicated issues in terms of trying to repair the damage that's so structurally baked into these actions. So with that, Abigail, I want to thank you. Do you have any final questions, comments you want to say? We thank you for this reporting. I think it's informative. I think any and everyone who's on the school boundary committee should read it and just know the complexity of the issues that we'll have to grapple with. So anything you want to say in closing?
I don't have anything to add. I think I talked for a while, but I do just want to thank everyone again. I really appreciate everyone having me, and I appreciate all the comments that have been made afterwards. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to following this process and following all of the important contributions that it sounds like folks in this room will make to it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and we look forward to hopefully your continued reporting on the topic. I wish you a good evening. Please stick around if you can. If not, we totally understand. I do want to, at this point, bring up our next speaker, who is phenomenal, really understands these issues at a very complicated and nuanced way. Mary Filardo is the Executive Director of the 21st Century School Fund, and she is going to talk about the other process that's going to be getting kicked off soon, which is around master facilities, and what we need to be thinking about and considering in this process, the complexities of it, how it actually impacts the other process of where people want to send their kids. So with that, Mary, I want to not take any more time talking, but pitch it to you. Wait a minute, for some reason you went mute. Wait a minute, you were talking and now you're mute. So.
I am, okay, sorry.
Okay,
and I have to apologize. I'm in a high school library in Phoenix, Arizona, folks. And it's at meetings where we're discussing educational facility master planning. So it's appropriate, but it's not the best environment. But what I wanted to do was to make sure that, and I want to share my screen.
I'm making you a co-host so you can do anything you need to.
Okay, wait, I have to get off. Okay, is that good now?
No, you're co-host now, so you should be able to share now.
Okay, so let's see, where did it go? Here it is. Share.
Yep, there you are.
From the beginning. Make it go from the beginning. Yep. Okay. All right, and let me shrink this. All right, so this actually is a master plan process, right? Kind of an optimal master plan process. So, and in that process, what essentially the government and their consultants will do is which they should have community input onto, but they're going to describe the existing conditions, right? Sort of what the population, demographics, how many households have children. They'll be doing projections, how are our schools organized by grade levels, their, kind of governance, their locations, the lottery policy that, and, they should have something about the quality of program opportunities, whether or not there's equity in the programs. And then, of course, there's the facility condition index, and they'll be describing the condition of buildings and frankly, the capacity. I don't have it there, but, and they should be, although I have to say that I don't know that in any of the master plans previously have they looked at the diversity in enrollments. Okay, but these are the kinds of things that the community can hide. When? Okay, it'll be about 20 minutes. They might be a little noisy, but I'll be okay.
Okay. Awesome. Have a good day.
Yes,
Or
thanks.
good night.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, the meeting just ended. Anyway, so there's going to be a description of existing conditions, but then the most important thing, and this is the thing that you all really need to kind of do, I would argue, independent even of the process, in part so you can refine it with the process, but also, frankly, Ebony, so that you can really push it, which is what are the desired conditions for essentially the Woodson feeder pattern and other folks in Ward 7. And I just threw in some of what I think it's sort of like the examples of things that you might be looking for, but I think that it's actually really important that, and you can see it's not, in a way, it's not that complicated, but it's really important that there be this vision. And then this is essentially where the plan, this middle section here that I've got these 10 points, and I have, essentially standards for each of these points, but these are what's involved in that plan process. It's got to engage the public. There has to be some vision that is inspiring, right? And so, I've heard for, I don't know, like over a decade now, the desire to have a middle school, a really, a vibrant, neighborhood middle school with dual language, with all kinds of, co-curriculars and multiple languages. Anyway, so what's the vision for the schools in the Woodson feeder pattern, and then basically what's the education plan? And this is partly where DCPS kind of is selling us short here, because they don't really have a plan. Nothing that's in writing that they've kind of worked over with it, but there needs to be an education plan. But then how do these schools work into the neighborhoods? And for Ward 7, I think that folks really need to talk about, like, what is the relationship between the charter and the charter growth and DCPS? So it's a really, there's some very difficult issues that need to be addressed, but I think there would be, you all have kind of worked together enough that I think you could get at whether, do you want community schools? Which of your schools should be community schools, right? What does that mean to be a community school? I know in Ward 7, there were some like extended year schools, but as a city, even, should we be looking at year-round education and not just, our 180 days, during our, 9-month period? What are we going to do for the adolescents? It seems to me like we're cutting them short. And this is partly why they're causing us problems, right? That we're not doing enough for them. We're not giving them enough activities. We're not giving them enough challenges, even in what we're asking them in school. So net zero school. A net zero school is basically a school that generates as much energy on site as it uses. Okay.
Mhm.
So you've got, you know, issues around the environment. You again, as Abigail, you know, raised, do we care if they're economically integrated or racially integrated? And, you know, the thing that kills me always about the way racial integration often goes, it's like, well, they want to send, like the kids in Ward 3, they want to import racial diversity and ethnic diversity. They don't want to go anywhere. And so is that how we want it? Is that the way it's supposed to go? You know, but there needs to be some vision of this is where we want to end up. Again, you know, and Ebony's heard me say this, but I think 70% of the kids in our public that we publicly fund should be in DCPS school. And that most of those kids should be in by right in their, you know, kind of their neighborhood by right schools or in their feeder patterns. You know, not just create more and more application seats and application schools. But then, of course, a part of that is that there has to be this equitable access to academic and co-curricular opportunities. And all of the schools should be modern and well maintained. And one of the things I did put in the chat, Marla, is that one of the things that happened after mayoral control is the modernization program became far less equitable. The modernization program really started in 2000. But by 2008, what they had done is they tried to give every ward the same amount of money. Well, that was crazy because there was a whole lot more school space in Ward 7 and 8 than anywhere else in the city. So if you just give them the same amount of money, that meant that there was far less money on a per square foot basis than was really needed. So that was one way that it was, because there used to be 3 planning areas east of the river. And so there was in the capital program, a modernization for each planning area. That meant, and Ward 2 and 3 had to share, they shared a planning area. So 7 and 8 got more modernizations early, but this is, you know, we're talking before 2008, than 2 and 3 did. But as soon as there was mayoral control, that completely changed. So anyway, this is a complicated process, and you can't, you know, a lot of the vision pieces here, you can't get to, you know, you need them for the boundaries as well, right? You can't, you know, for the student assignment. So it can't really be done, you know, in isolation. So maybe I'll just leave it up a minute. But, you know, I'd just like to stop now and see, you know, from the perspective of sort of major, you know, sort of where would you see needing to get in the next 10 years, right? What are some of the things that come to the top? I mean, I heard the gentleman talk about, you know, a dual language school that, you know, kids from Elsie Whitlow Stokes, you know, could continue into. But what are some of the other things that you all have been talking about that come forward? Feeder into Woodson, that was another one.
Yeah,
what else is there?
Feeder into Woodson, you know, just sensible feeders. Kids are kind of passing other schools to get to a middle school that is more in their immediate area. Yeah, middle school capacity is a big one. I'm talking about middle schools. I'm looking at the chat too. Yeah, programmatic investments. I talked about that earlier, that those need to make sense. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm trying to grapple with is being a member of the school boundary committee. When I was a principal and a turnaround principal, and the school that I had, the facilities were pretty horrible. And so, you know, people associated the condition of the school with the quality of the education. So I don't know how we kind of parse those away from each other and don't see how one feeds into another. And it sends kind of a tacit message or implied message to children, how much you value them, depending on the quality of their school, meaning the quality of the facility. So I think we want students to have feeder patterns where they actually stay in 7. We have feeder patterns that send them outside of 7 to Ward 8. And we're not trying to be divisive at 8, but
Right.
it does make sense for feeder patterns to kind of respect some of those kinds of boundaries. And so those are the kinds of conversations we're having. I'm reading the chat for more conversations that we were having around this issue. But those are some of the biggest ones. I mean, I think, you know, we are concerned. We hear about capacity issues, occupancy issues, you know, how the level of the use. So we're wondering what's going to happen to some of our schools in that regard, and how that's going to impact. And what else are they going to do with it? We also concerned about Winston. They're talking about bringing that back on, but how and for what purpose? So
I mean, I
those
thought
are
they were
all-
saying that it was going to be a workforce development, some
right.
kind of career tech place.
Yeah, I mean, the last conversation was that it was some type of kind of school facility that will be used by everyone in the city. I don't know that everyone in the city will use it, but you know, that's kind of the language that they're using.
I mean,
around
what about the boys' school at Ron Brown?
Ron Brown, tell me more what you're asking there, because Ron Brown is generally considered a very valuable asset in our community, and we want to support it.
So
But-
it's got 190 kids in it, right?
Right.
And
yeah.
it's over 100,000 square foot building.
Right. So these are the things that we're you know, we have concerns about. What does that mean? Because Ron
Well, and it's
Brown
going to
is
be, it's going to be on the, you know, for the master plan, it's going to be, there's going to end up being some kind of co-location in there. I mean, is my guess, right? They're not going to leave it.
Well, that's what we're also concerned about, co-location. And for those who don't know about co-location, that's where two schools or two programs or two something get placed in the same facility, two or more, because in some places it's actually more than two in some cities, and do those programs match and support one another. So for instance, if you have an all-boys school, high school, what programming or other program could go in that school that would support the climate and culture of an all-male environment? So these are the very real conversations we're grappling with and thinking about. We do think that they're gearing us up for some co-location probably being put on. Sousa also is a school with low rates and a lot of square footage. So these are the things that we're thinking about.
So what about one of the, in terms of the boundary policy, because I know, Marla, you'll be representing folks in that, some of the ideas that it'd be good to test before bringing them to a committee. One of them has to do with whether or not you could give feeder rights to any of the elementary charters into your middles, into Sousa, into, you know, if you had Ron Brown as a middle school, or if you opened Winston as a middle school, could you create, you know, because part of what's going on now with the charters is they're creating their own feeder patterns, right? So KIP's got its own feeder. Huh?
Yeah. Right. They are.
Friendship has its own feeder patterns. KIP has its own feeder patterns, and DCI has its own feeder pattern. And they're doing that basically to make it easy for them to capture kids, right? So, and frankly, the by right preference is also just about them. It's not really about looking out for at-risk kids. You know, they are struggling too with how many schools there are, right? So, you know, if they can, you know, get some more of these preferences, because at this point they don't get much preference except sibling, and they will fill their enrollments more easily with other preferences. So,
I mean,
anyway,
you know, the third row of the conversation nobody really wants to have. I mean, can we sustain all these schools? You know, really, honestly. Well,
I mean, I think it is a problem. I think you can't sustain them and provide the quality of programming that that the kids deserve, you know? And so we're working right now on a project. We've got some grad students and we're working on it with DC Fiscal Policy Institute, looking at the amount of administration funding, central administration funding at all of the LEAs in DC. So that's all of the charter schools and DCPS. And, you know, it just the logic of it doesn't work, right? There are no economies of scale when you have LEAs with 400 kids or 500 kids or 200 kids, which we have in DC, right? I mean, all over the United States, they're closing, you know, school districts because they're so tiny. But somehow, you know, we've got tons of them. So I think it's going to be a problem. I think it should be discussed in the master plan, the facility master plan process, but I can't picture it unless the community brings it forward in a way that's not adversarial. I think it really just needs to be practical.
Yeah, I
And-
think this cannot be an ideological conversation. It has to be practical, like you said. I think, you know, we have some window into school budgets who did well, who did not. I just saw an article before we got on that DC has kind of officially announced that downtown and people not coming back to work, and they said it was going to hurt the tax base. And so now we're going to see not the same level of revenue for the city. I mean, I think these are all the things that we have to grapple with, and we need to be honest with ourselves. And we need to think about it from a position of children first, what's in the best interest of children above any other interest. And I think these are going to be difficult conversations to have. And I don't think it can be about, you know, being ideological, but it has to be about what really is going to give the best opportunity for every child in this city to really have the kind of facilities, programming, educational experience, equity, you know, and opportunities. So it's going to be robust, and we just really wanted to make sure that our community understood the robustness and the importance of these conversations. Because when you hear school facilities, you think about just facilities, but in a real facilities plan, you should be also thinking about programming, because what if you have a STEM school? Like a STEM school should have different facilities than you know, a art school or a performing arts school. Like they should look different. They should have different needs. And these are the types of things that we need to be really
well, and the enrollments and the capacities are really huge, and it's a big issue. And and then the quality, and also I don't know how much they'll be looking at. I got an email from someone who was concerned about whether windows being in classrooms in charter schools, and I'm like, you know, I know for a fact that DCPS does not do any classrooms without windows, right? They don't spec that. Their standard is windows in a classroom. So we don't really know what all the conditions are in terms of what kinds of rooms are being used for classrooms in charter schools. So I don't know whether or not, you know, the communities will have the appetite to really open those doors and say, let's look at this. But I think there's opportunity actually for there to be, like right now, there's a policy that says a DCPS school, if 70% of the parents and the teachers agree to it, that they can become a charter school. That's how Paul became a charter school.
right.
Well, why can't there be the same policy if 70% of the charter school parents and 70% of the charter school teachers say they want to be in DCPS, that they could do that? And it might be that there might be some charters that say, no, we want to, you know, come back into the DCPS system. You know, DCPS has been.
Mary, there's a question.
Yeah.
There's a question about how capacity is calculated in facilities and in relation to this discussion.
Well, they're going to redo them, and those are things that people really need to pay attention to, because they are a bit problematic. Like right now, the new Banneker is really its capacity is about 850, and for some reason DCPS has its capacity at 1100. It's not an 1100 student school, but you know, and I think that that'll be corrected by the architects that'll be doing the capacities, because in general, they do know them. But, you know, I think that is a problem, and you need to pay attention to it, because if
Can
you're
I-
at 50% of capacity, they're likely to give you a problem.
Sorry, so I had some questions about that. So like, for example, Woodson serves a 25% special education population whose classes are capped far lower
Right.
than 25, sometimes as
Right.
small as 8, right? Depending on the situation. And so like we are at capacity. There are people floating, all the offices are filled, there is no space at Woodson. And yet when I see these reports, we clock in at extremely low utilization. But like their utilization is calculated as having multiple lunch periods, not everyone being able to fit into our auditorium. And apparently like what, 25 kids in every potential classroom, when that's just programmatically not what we offer. And so part of my concern is that, right, when we have these conversations as a district that are already predisposed to close DCPS schools or like hand our buildings over to someone else, right? That like a school like Woodson clocks in and they're like, oh, well, you're not using your building. You need 900 kids. It's like 900 kids will not fit at Woodson with our current programming, which is based on federal law. Like that's not optional programming. That's
Well,
not
I
nice
think,
to have.
Laura, when you talk about it, I want to break that down a little bit more, because we're talking about numbers for, you know, students with special needs. We're talking about, you know, AP classes. We're talking about certain classes. And that's why we're talking about this whole conversation around economies of scale. So if you have a class with 8 kids, there has to be, if you're saying that every class should be 25, then you have to figure out where those other children go. And so some of this is impacted by economies of scale, and you can't offer, for instance, AP physics if you only have 5 kids who are going to take it. So it ends up impacting the programming, the quality of the programming, because a principal will have to say, well, we only have 5 kids who are going to take it, and I don't have the teacher capacity or the school capacity, room capacity to offer that class, because there's only 5 kids, so I'm not going to offer that course. These are
what
the
I'm
kind of
talking about
connections
is
people don't know.
not AP. I'm talking about special education.
No, I would say special ed too, but I was giving an example. Yeah, exactly. But people don't understand how facilities issues impact what can actually happen in school in that regard, and how economies of scale. You need a certain baseline of students to have
That's true. But one of the
program.
things, just from a systems perspective, Marla, I think that one of the things that the community could do is say, and I don't understand why it hasn't come up in the budget more, is that, you know, if we've got let's say if we've got a school with a high risk population, we don't want class sizes over 20.
Right.
Period. I don't care what the union contract says. If you've got concentrated kids at risk, you don't want class size over 20. And you do our programmatic capacity where you don't put any more than 20 kids in a classroom, and then you do your 8 kids in the autism classroom, and you do however many you have to do. But you basically say you're going to calculate it on 20. And I know of other school districts that do that. They say, okay, our Title I schools, they have 20 kids per grade. The others have 25, right? So you can differentiate that, and that will make a difference. And it's frankly what some of the advantage of having what are so-called underutilized schools, that we can have smaller class size, and they should be funding that, and they should be using some of that at-risk money to fund smaller class size. But I think Ebony's got her hand up.
Oh, Ebony, go ahead. I
want to go back to I don't know if it was what Mary, I think Mary raised it about like the facilities and matching them to the programs. So like and thank you, Mary, for participating with us. But one of the things that the state board is currently undertaking, which is actually related to probably why Mary's in Phoenix, but is we got a grant from the National Association for State Boards of Education to look at healthy school facilities. I'm telling you this because we noticed that as a city, we actually don't have a standard for what is a healthy, safe, and educationally appropriate school in a district that applies across all sectors. I'm not talking about like we're going to a ribbon cutting because this school is new and shiny, or like somebody has bought a building and whatever. I'm talking about literally like what is the quality of facility we guarantee to all of our kids. I'm talking about like the floor. The educationally appropriate piece fits into this because it matters what kind of facilities you have when you have certain programs. So like you would not put a high school in the elementary school because you're probably not going to have like a chemistry lab, or
Right.
like the hallways will be too tight, right? Like you're not going to have lockers or all these things. Or when
Or
you
the
talk
gym
about,
is not going to be big enough.
correct, school grounds, like some of our schools don't have a
Mhm.
bunch of outdoor space. And so that matters a lot when you talk about like facilities versus like programs that you're able to offer, and the quality of academic experience children are able to have. We, of course, like the deputy mayor knows this conversation is going on. We did it purposefully during this time. We do have representatives from DCPS on there, in addition to Jen Comey, who is running the master facilities process. And I think we have someone from Friendship.
From Friendship, yeah.
Yeah, someone from Friendship now. But we, in conversations with the deputy mayor, they are going to use what is coming out of this committee in this report, which will be delivered in June, as part of the master facilities plan. That's something the DME said that they also think would be helpful to say, okay, what is it we should be looking at across when it comes to the education we're able to provide? If you all have thoughts, and we have not yet, like we literally had a meeting today to talk about like the full work plan for it. I don't know yet what public engagement or anything will look like around that, but if you have thoughts or of what should be included in the definition, if you have any examples of like this school community is excellent, right? Like, and more schools should look like this or feel like this, please send them my way. But that piece around like, how do facilities support the programming we're able to provide is actually really important.
So we're at time, we're past time actually, and I just hope that what people take away from this conversation is that no matter if you're in a charter school or a DCPS school, you should be highly engaged. No matter if you're a teacher, a parent, a grandparent, you should be highly engaged. If you're a good neighbor to people in your community, you should be highly engaged, because these are structural issues, literally, that we're going to be grappling with. They are not, they're nuanced, they're structural, they have many implications. And so we wanted to bring, we weren't going to solve everything here. We weren't going to come up with a plan here, but we did want to really put people on notice that this is not something that they should just kind of be walking through life, not paying close attention to, and not talking to the people who are on the committee, because they have implications. They have implications educationally, they have implications in terms of the quality of your community, they have implications in terms of housing. And there is no person, no resident, no, of this district that's not going to be impacted in some way by this. And so I want to thank you, Mary, for raising the complexity of this and helping to just put our community to understand exactly what all of this is going to mean, and to prepare. We need to prepare people.
Yeah, you need to prepare, because they're late, right? They were gonna start in January. It's March. So they're gonna be like, oh, we're too quick. We don't really have time for the community part. We're just gonna come up with a plan. And so,
and that's not acceptable. Right. It's not acceptable to cut out the community out of it. And as well as we need to prepare people that there are some hard decisions. If this is done right and well, there are hard decisions to be made. And so we want people involved in the hard decision making. So I thank
All
you.
right,
I
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
you.
I'm
Okay.
gonna have to jump.
I know
All
you
right.
did. You'll be a-
I'll come back if you need me. All right,
Okay,
bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
At this point, I want to bring forth our state board representative to bring your updates.
Good evening. I'm sleepy, is my update. So we had our working session last night. A couple things that are helpful to know as we prepare for our public meeting, I guess almost 2 weeks from now. So thing one, we did get an update from OSSI on the social studies standards and what was included in public comment. All of the materials that were shown to the board members are available on our board website, even if OSSI has not posted them to their own website yet. So the full summary of public comment is on our website. In addition to the shifts that we can anticipate they will make to the draft is on our website. A couple of, I guess, highlights around that. One, they're making some shifts around World History 2 in particular to make it more inclusive. Two, we will see what this looks like, but there was a lot of feedback around integration of standards, a number of standards and like vertical alignment. And so they heard that feedback and we should expect changes in the next draft. Three, we also heard feedback around just the orientation of the standards with regards to still centering like European cultures. We understand that that is a shift that OSSI is planning to make when in its newest draft. It's going to take them about at least a month to come out with a new draft of the standards. So what that means is it's now March. The first week of April, the draft will be out. The board is going to work with OSSI and the deputy mayor's office. Why? Because we need all the past capacity we could get, and everybody needs to be on board to do engagements that the board will host. I do not have the dates for those yet because we just got the full timeline for what we should expect, but we will do, my guess is 2 to 3 public engagements, like citywide engagements in different parts of the city, where people can give feedback on the draft. That also means that our hope is we mostly, tell us honest feedback, so the good, the bad, and the ugly. But our hope is that we hear that people see the shifts that they were hoping to see in this version of the standards, do see these as an improvement, and standards that both like teach accurate history and can prepare our students like for the future. And if there are other changes and additions, they are minor enough that we can vote in May. Why is a May vote important? A May vote is important because it's not like you just hand teachers standards and say, go do your best, live your best life, teachers. That does not work. OSSI would then need to work with LEAs, the different schools that we have to develop, select some curriculum and develop like professional development, make sure schools have like high quality instructional materials that align. And in many of the cases, the standards are not like you can go just buy like a textbook and teach them. So OSSI has work to do between the potential adoption of the standards and rollout. If we don't vote by May, that pushes it back another full school year. So that doesn't mean we have to vote yes or no in May, but I do want to give people a sense of the timing, the timeline, and be just as informative as possible, both about what's in them and the process, because people should know. You are welcome, always welcome to come show up and testify at our public meetings because like now you're testifying to us to inform our votes. I will say when you come and tell us all the things, the good, the bad, and the ugly, like focus on the things you want to change, but also focus on the things you want to keep, because I don't want those things thrown out either. So that's social studies. Second thing, menstrual health. We have an addendum to our health standards that actually Councilmember Pinto required. That will be in front of the board at our upcoming public meeting. We will, I believe, be the first jurisdiction in the country to have standards for menstrual health. What does that mean? That means we're going to start teaching everybody, beginning in 4th grade, around the menstrual cycle. Both those, I think the language we're using is those who menstruate and their peers, because little boys probably need to know what's happening as far as his health too. So that's something in front of the board currently. The board also did send feedback around that. OSSI has made some adjustments around like the gendered language they're using to be more inclusive. I think most of the board is pretty excited about that change. And we should vote this coming public meeting on those. Last thing that I think is important, even though there are of course other things, but I do want us to all go back to our lives because it's getting late. I did send a budget priorities letter to the mayor on Monday. I've been on work travel, so I haven't been able to like post it all the places, but I wanted to at least get it to her. And we'll also do a kind of at a glance version. I want to thank people who are on here who came to like the budget listening sessions or have been very clear with me about what they wanted to see in the budget. And I also testified at the DCPS budget hearing. I think that was last week. If you have other things, and I can put the link to the letter in the chat. It's long, which is why I'm doing the at a glance budget version. But if you have other things, the board is also developing a budget priorities letter. We are doing that now. So please, if you're like, oh, Eboni-Rose, I looked at your letter, it didn't have this thing in there. You get a second pass, but I try to get things to the mayor as early as possible. I tried to include many of the things that I've heard, not just here, but like I go to all the ANC meetings, had the budget listening session, all the things people bring to me. I want to say probably somewhere around 400 residents I got input from. And so I try my best to be thorough and comprehensive. I'll add the link to the chat, and I look forward to sharing like an at a glance version of all the things education. I'm saying education and youth because some of them go a little bit further than the school building. So thanks to everybody. And that's my update for the evening.
Thank you. I think we should also let everybody know, not only are you the Ward 7 rep for the State Board of Education, you are actually the president of the State Board of Education, which is an important role. And so people should know that. With that being said, we're almost at the end of our conversation today. I do want to share a few things before you close. Before we close. And one is that we still want committee sign up. So please sign up for committees. You see all the things that are going on, the full spectrum of issues in education, and we need people engaged and signed up on communities and ready to work. Announcements. There is one announcement for sure I want to make sure that people know that we have a Ward 7 Education Council YouTube channel. I will put that in the chat so that people can always refer to those videos and share them. And in addition to that, we are coming up on Ward 7 Education Council elections next month. We'll start the nomination process. In May, we'll have elections. We will have elections for the offices of chair, recording secretary, and parliamentarian. So it is important that people are engaged and who want to run are making themselves known so that we can get you involved. I know there was one announcement that someone had put in the chat they wanted to make. If you can come off mute now and make that announcement, we would appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me a few minutes. I will be very brief as I know you all want to leave and go on to your lives. My name is Alicia Butler. I'm on the faculty at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and I am working with Dr. Kristen Sinclair at Georgetown to understand how parents, community members engage in decision-making processes around education policy in the city. So we are conducting a survey of parents, and that we would love to particularly hear from folks in Ward 7, just to understand what are the strategies that you all use both in your schools and in the wider community to try to influence education policy. So I will drop both of the links to the survey in the chat. We have an English version and a Spanish language version, and as well as a flyer. Please share with your networks. We especially want to hear from folks east of the river because we think that this is an important opportunity to learn about the ways that people engage in policy decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other announcements? Go ahead.
The mayor's the SYP, that deadline has been extended to March 6th. So if you know a young person who is still, might have been slacking, but still might want to sign up for summer jobs, that application is open through March 6th.
Okay, which is only a few days away. So get that message out quickly, because it's not like there's a whole bunch of time between now and then. Anyone else have any closing remarks? Questions? Okay, well, in the chat is our YouTube page. Was there someone? I'm sorry, did I miss someone? Okay,
I'm
Natalie,
sorry,
go ahead.
Marla.
Dr. Smith, go
Sorry,
ahead.
this is Natalie.
I know.
Sorry,
Yep.
this is
Go ahead.
Natalie Smith, founder and CEO of Global Citizens Public Charter School. We're really grateful that we have a location in Ward 7, which is where we wanted to open. Predominantly, about 75% of our families live in Ward 7 and 8. We're really excited about that. We're a language immersion school, the first dual language immersion school, elementary school in DC to offer Mandarin, Chinese, and Spanish pathways. And just wanted to share, I'll share the link just to our website, but families could sign up for an open house coming up on Saturday, March 11th at 1 o'clock, and it's virtual. And so just wanted to share that. We started off with pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, and now we have kindergarten this year, and we'll have first grade next year, and we'll grow grade level as of now until we get to 5th grade in the year 27-28. So just wanted to share that information. Thank you so much.
Okay, did you say where the open house is going to be?
Oh, it's a virtual open house. I'm just going to send the link to our website, and there's a pop-up that comes up to say if you want to join an open house. It's on Saturday, March 11th, from 1 to 2:30, and it's virtual.
Okay.
But I'll just put our website in the chat. Thank you so much, Marla.
Excellent. And then lastly, COVID testing is no longer free at libraries, so understand that as of February 28th. So you need to, but you can still go to your COVID center. So
I had one quickly, I'm sorry, really quick. So I just wanted to briefly introduce myself to everyone. My name is Deandra Brooks, and I'm the Community and Engagement Specialist for the Deputy Mayor for Education's office. And I am spending the majority of my time rooted in the community and connecting with our young people, our parents, and our school communities. So if there's ever anything you needed to lift up to the DME or connect with, again, I am not only out, but creating opportunities for our senior leadership team to also be connected to community members. So just wanted to say hello, a good evening to everyone.
well, thank you for coming. We hope you'll continue to come and hear what our community is thinking about and talking about. Again, as we close out, elections will happen this year for the offices of chair, recording secretary, and parliamentarian. We'll start the nominations process next month, with the elections in May. Next month, we're going to be talking about the gun violence report. We're going to have the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform come and talk about the DC gun violence action report. We're going to have Peace for DC, and we may even have Linda Harley Harper, who is the gun czar and also the executive director of the WANS department, to really talk about community safety That's an issue that's adjacent to education. So we address not only education issues, but education adjacent issues. There's a real drumbeat around moving to some policies of the past. We know they didn't work then. They probably won't work going forward. So we want to bring, inform people on what really works and what really can ensure that our children are safe. Just found out yesterday from the governor of Maryland when he was on Morning Joe that Maryland locks up more Black boys than any other state in the country. So locking up people is not making communities as safe as they think they will. So these are the type of issues we're child advocates, we're community advocates. We're really trying to think about what's in the best interest of children and families. And with that, we're going to close out, adjourn. Everyone have a good weekend. Again, it's March, it's Women's History Month. So learn about a woman around you who's doing great things and support her in her work.